Well, we are conditioned to think of ourselves in a certain way. But when we look closely, we'll see that there are sections, and each section has a good use. So we can do it either from where we stand and go backwards, or we can go from where we originally stood and go forward. These are our two options. And if you can't understand it the one way, then you have to understand it the other way. So we have to adhere to two fundamental rules if we are to get anywhere. And both of these rules will tell me that ownership is not mine. So, and it comes out in our language. We say, my body, my mind. And we also say, I'm alive. Now you've covered three aspects of an individual. So if we start with the body, even though you say you understand it, still it's a kind of abstract way, because identification is still there with the body. And if identification is still there with the body, then this is actually technically called egoism. That is the original owner that stands there, is identifying with something that it owns. And so that's the first thing. Don't say my body. You can say it's God's temple, something like that. And for functional purposes, you can say it's God's earth car. But there's no doubt we have an unseen thing called the mind, and we cannot prove anything that goes on in there except to ourselves. There's a certain kind of philosophy which says, I don't take anything to be true until and unless I personally experience it. Well, since I don't know what you're thinking, and since you're sitting there and I'm sitting here, you don't exist and your thoughts don't exist. Well, of course, immediately most people would dismiss that. So we don't say it like that. And we have to introduce into our language, therefore, apparitional words, such as seems to be, looks like, appears to be. We appear to be a working, moving, personalized machine that has a certain job, a certain career, has a domestic environment, let's say family and so on, all of that. Now you see, the first principle in the Vedantic spiritual path really would be to apply what is called discernment. And look at all of those statements very carefully and see, are they true for all time? Or are they only true now and then? They can be true when you wake up, no doubt. And all the thoughts that may accompany you, no doubt you feel that these are true as well. But you see, Vedanta has a waterproof argument, if you like, when it takes up the subject of consciousness. And when you take the subject of consciousness or conscious fields, what is my conscious experience? Well, we are wide awake, but as soon as we close our eyes, we are gone. Something else is there. Now, during this moment where all the senses are alive and awake, what do we see and what do we register? We tend to make a bifurcation of our experience into subject and object, forgetting that the body itself is an object. We take the whole thing, the whole human personality, body, mind, everything, and we then create some strategy to deal with life, mostly taking it as a struggle. And in Vedanta, we take it as a game or a sport. So why should we have this misunderstanding when upfront Vedanta philosophy is telling us that our true nature is pure and full and free and perfect? It is the Atman. It is the thing that never changes. It is the constant witness. Now, it's a good thing to start from there, actually. If that is the case, then, and the first question is, can we take it out of the abstract? Yes, and we do. As soon as we say I, we're acknowledging it. I know we're associating it with all these other things. We're associated with the body-mind complex. But we still have this urge, I exist. I am so-and-so. And that self-awareness, that self-consciousness is our evidence that I exist. So we take this existent thing without anything else in its pure state. And then we wrap around it a little bit, as it were, some kind of background, creative background. When waking is gone, when dream is gone, that background remains. It is, we can characterize it as bliss. That's the first thing that we acknowledge, the first thing that we see. And from that, there's a potential creative area where we produce something that has the capacity to make decisions. Right now, you're listening, you're deciding, you're putting things into category. Maybe I agree with this, I don't agree with that, and I'm uncertain about that, somewhere in between. So there is this judging aspect which appears to be enlightening. When we apply it, then we say, oh, I've chosen the right path here, the right path there, I've made the right choice here, the right choice there. I've used the capacity of my individuality to make decisions and to enact them. I've exercised the will. This is the willing part of the mind. Now, let's stop there for a moment. If this real self that is full and free and perfect and never changes is the only reality, what can we say about these first two layers which are there, one potential and one creative? And the creative part will be that area where we make decisions, and from those decisions we make a world. Well, it's just an instrument. It's an instrument so that we can peer through these layers and levels and play the game of life, not struggle against it. Therein lies the practical difference. So we take all of the events that happen before us and we don't take it personally. We just see through it. When we do that, we're applying this discrimination, this discernment, this capacity to sort things out. That's a faculty which we have. Now, apart from this area of bliss, the other things which we have, namely intellect and the willing capacity, and then the whole range of mind, which is a vast field of experiences. And then, of course, relating this to the world itself. So we have, in order to view the world, we have to have a viewing platform. We have to have gateways, or telescopes, if you will, or windows, where we can view the world. And collectively, we can call this the body. But the body has to have something extra for cognition. Because I've seen bodies, no doubt, many of you have seen bodies. And you know that A body where life has been withdrawn is still a body. All the faculties are intact, but a vital thing is missing. In other words, the activating thing which we call life that lends itself to in a state of awareness where the body is used for the purpose of seeing and hearing and touching and tasting and so on. Well, the body itself has deteriorated, possibly, let us say, and it has died because the biology of the body says that cells will die at some point, unless we can find a way of extending the length of what is called telomeres, I think. These are things in the cell, and as we age, they become shorter and shorter and shorter. Eventually, they finish. So that we are mortal beings, that's quite clear. But we don't die, only the body dies. And only the body changes, we don't change. You must have noticed that you look very different from when you were 5 years of age. The physical body has changed. Physical body will change again, I can assure you. So if you had a birthday the other day, it's a kind of mark on the calendar to say, okay, next year, year after year after year after, there will be changes throughout the year. And we can take note of these changes. Eventually, these changes stop. And when these changes stop, we call this death. Now, you see all the experiences that have been accumulated. How can they die? Purely from a physics point of view, the whole idea of evolution from the yogic point of view is all these experiences that we have a psychological aspect of the person, then that gets carried over. Now, do we have any evidence that it gets carried over apart from logic? Of course, logic tells us that it does. Well, I think there are, particularly I think it's Virginia University or Virginia College, have done many tests, collected a lot of data with regards to both near-death experience and also with regard to memories of previous lives. And there can only be one logical conclusion that those people working on it have come to. And that is that there is a previous life, and based on that, there will be a forthcoming one. Now, this law of causality was always there, it was never disputed. And somehow, you see the Abrahamic tradition, the oldest tradition of it is Judaism. They have not much to say about death. Mainly, they're not worried about it. They're not concerned with it. They don't even deal with it by and large. They're just concerned with this life, leading a good moral and ethical life here. That's all. And there are some schools which will speculate afterlife and so on. The Pharisaic school would have thought this. There's clear evidence that Jesus would have thought it, and so on. Anyway, regardless of that, this body goes, and the reason why we know it's gone is because consciousness is withdrawn from it. We can speak to it, a corpse, and the corpse won't reply. We can offer it a cup of tea, it won't nod and say, yes, please, or no, thank you. And we know absolutely that this is a kind of a shell which is there, and something has left. Some vital thing has left, yes. So the Taittiriya Upanishad puts it in the language of sheaths. One thing fits into another, fits into another, fits into another, and so goes on. And the final sheath, I know what it's made of. But there is never a distinction between what we call body and mind. And if you want to see that emphasized in great detail, you read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. He points out very clearly that mind is subtle matter, and matter is gross mind. Now, if we take that, that means that every wave that arises in the mind, you can view the mind as a kind of field or a kind of area where waves are present. And every wave, called a thought or a feeling that arises in it, will naturally affect everything else. Why? Because mind is subtle matter, and it translates into the body. And in that sense, we can say the mind has created the body. What has created the mind? We go back like that. Well, this intellect has created that, and then it goes back until you come to a datum. You cannot go any further, which is I. I am existing. I'm existence itself. This is I. And I am taking on, as it were, some instrumentations in order to discover myself. Now, it doesn't exactly think in this way, as far as we can understand, because it has no mind of its own. And so it transcends body, transcends mind, transcends matter, transcends thought. So we can say it is the manifestor thought. It is the manifestor of knowledge. It is the manifestor of intelligence. It is consciousness that spills over, as it were, and into all the other kinds of areas and fields that we have. So we have to get used to this idea, because our gut doesn't tell us this. Our gut says, I exist. So far, so good. Our gut gives us an element of, or a sense of individuality. Well, that's a mistake. And then it gives us a sense that we are also a psychophysical being, something with a body. In fact, most of the time we think, I am the body. All our characteristics are carried forward. If you think of a friend, you'll think of that friend visually, physically. What does the face look like? How high, how tall is this person? How high, how long have I been in Ireland? Well, my answer is typically 5'10". So you see, how long, or any of these questions means, tell me about the history of your presence in a certain geographic region as a physical entity, or at least a psychophysical entity. We have habits, and these habits carry over, and these habits are stored in the unconscious mind. And it is the unconscious mind that has its pulling power. It pulls.
Swamiji, I understand that the mind can affect the body. So if I am sad, I can get tears in the body. So that's a physical thing. And it can also affect in different ways. But to say that mind creates the body is a bit difficult to grasp.
Yes, nevertheless, accept it. Not blindly, but see the logic of it first. And also experience it. How do we experience it? You see, we experience it in so many different ways. Let me put it this way. If I were to describe to you, as you sit opening a lemon, you put it on a board, and as you quite rightly say, if you visualize this enough, then saliva flows in the mouth and juice, and gastric juice flows in the stomach and so on. If you think of food, that happens. So If you think that the mind and the body are separate, then you've missed this whole understanding that mind is subtle matter and the body or matter is gross mind. That's all. Now, in order to understand this properly, we have to understand the world of waves. The 5 elements, we have to understand these. And these 5 elements, tanmatra, we can break it down in a way like this. We can say that it is God's grace metered out. If you think that the cells of the body are anything other than the expression of divine grace, then you have made a natural but fundamental error. What you call cells of the body has nothing to do with you. It arrives through divine grace. It is divine grace that converts the food into the cells of the body. It's divine grace that keeps them going. It's divine grace that gives each cell an element of intelligence. And I very strongly use this word, it's intelligence. How else would you understand? You can't think it's just mere machinery. When you see the intricacy of a cell, even the most basic cell, and you see it's very, very complex and not reproducible. You cannot do it through AI, by the way. So this organic thing is transformed from raw material into living cells. Now it gives you also a clue to so-called abiogenesis. How did this world start? Can you get mere sand and rock and so on and so forth and convert it into something that is a living cell? There has to be an additional component. And you cannot reproduce it in the laboratory. The additional component is called life. And life means that something is there and something else enters into it, as it were. And that really we call the divine. So you may not be aware of all your cells operating because we've left it to God's grace. God's grace is flowing as every cell of the body with its intimate structures. There's no other way it can work. So we can say that tanmatra is God's grace being metered out. But these 5 tanmatras, fundamental subtle elements, have to be understood to understand what I'm saying. And we only register them as the gross side of things, the gross elements. When we talk about the body, we're talking about these 5 tanmatras crystallized, as it were, in such a way that we can understand and relate to what they reveal in the world. The world itself is made from them. Our eyes, ears, etc. are made from it. Our sense organs are made from them. Our mind is also made from them. So when we say the mind is subtle waves, we're saying the mind is comprised of subtle tanmatras. And these crystallize to make the body. So the 5 elements, we have to understand them as existing outside as well as inside us. And therefore, if we change the thought, then we change the composition of these waves, of these tanmatras. And when we do that, we change our circumstances. It's just an inevitable spiritual law. So perfection cannot be achieved here because the present moment exists in wave form. When we say here, I mean this environment that we work in and we put a rubber stamp on to say endorse its reality. And perfection cannot exist in events because events change. But we can uphold this ideal of perfection in our thought. And we can, by practice, uphold it at the subconscious level, which I prefer to call habit level. And when the wave takes shape, it's limited to a form. So what we call the cells of the body, what we call the things that we see, and what we call the eyes and the ears and so on, these are the same waves, but they're taking the shape of a limited form. Without this form, it's all unlimited. You're thinking only in terms of individual fragments of cells, let's say. And all the things that we see and observe are all multiple. Don't think of them as individual. We learn to think of them as seeming fragments of only the one thing. So we see the limited forms every time, because when we see perfection, we become dissatisfied. That's why the mechanism for our misunderstanding that we call Maya plays on it. See, when you see a body, your body or somebody else's, the waves should be traced back to their origin. And that's the point. And when we see that this divine is there. In order to trace it back to this divine oneness, then we have to see the 5 elements as manifested grace being meted out in this way. If you just see the world as a materialist sees it, then you're falling for the trick. Now, in physics, let me be a little scientific and forgive me a little. You see, physicists are scratching their heads to see the greatest difficulty that they have, giving rise to all kinds of theories and interpretations of what is happening without any certainty about it. And I've told so many times, the whole of quantum physics or quantum mechanics is centered around, according to the great physicist Richard Feynman, this double-slit experiment whereby when you fire subatomic particles, electrons, photons, and so on, you fire them through elemental particles, you fire them through a screen with slits in. They arrive and get measured on a scintillating screen behind, not as particles, not as packets or quanta, but they appear actually with a behavior that looks like interference, the interference pattern of waves. So at the moment they go through, you'd think an electron can go through one slit or the other slit. No, it's going through all the slits simultaneously. If you have 100 slits, it's going through all of them at the same time. How is it that this can be explained? Well, at the moment, there are several different kinds of interpretations to work this out. But this is the explanation. We're trying to catch Maya. We're trying to catch the wave side of it, or the particle side of it. But the particle and the wave are the same thing. It's all waves, but as seen by us, as condensed by us, crystallized by us, it looks like cups and saucers and tables and chairs and bodies and cells, all of that. And the only difference between that and the mind is that the mind is just the subtle mechanism for it. It also contains these tanmatras, these waves. But what is behind it? What is behind it is an intellect. It is what we can call a cosmic mind at the universal level. And at the individual level, we can call it intellect. Either way, we use the same language for it, and that is buddhi. Buddhi or mahat, that grade 1. And as soon as you understand that, you register whatever comes out from that, whatever thought arises, will continue infallibly to the end, unless interfered with. You see, it's this interference pattern going on again, but in this sense, in this way, it is coming from your own thought, your own counter thought. You see something, you rub your eyes, I cannot believe it, you just counted it. So when we measure it, as we could visualize it or conceive of it, that it can come in units, we can see there's a thought. There's another thought, another thought, another thought, another thought. If we stand back, we can look at it, which is evidence I'm not the thought. And when we see that and put something in of our own, that thought has a creative capacity to condense not only in the body, by the way, not only in the cells as a transforming agent, but every other material thing, because everything that we register in the material world is actually waves. Now, these are not material waves in a traditional sense. You can see there being only one infinite, invisible. These are divine waves that are going out. Divine grace flowing in 5 different ways and combining and recombining. And the waves continue to our senses that are also comprised of these waves. They look like individual particulate objects. And so when I draw on a whiteboard the 24 cosmic principles, starting off with Brahman or Atman, and then I see how does this being become becoming. And in Jnana Yoga lectures, Swami Vivekananda actually draws a diagram like that. The absolute and the relative. How do we get from the one to the other? How do we get from being to becoming? Well, the in-between part, the mechanism for it, is an individual kind of causation called vivarta. And that is, it's an apparitional causation. It is made to look like something. And with that misunderstanding, that mistake, which is deliberately put out, an area of potentiality, and that as nature itself. And then the first manifestation of that will be called Mahat, or Buddhi, or Hiranyagarbha, or Cosmic Christ, or Cosmic Buddha. These principles require repeating. So what we call my mind, we have to re-register that. Just as we re-registered my body, we re-register my mind. We can use beautiful poetic language about it and say, it's the Lord's sitting room. And we have to clean it. When we clean the body and clean the mind, then of course we see this reality. We see through these mantras. And we go back, as it were, we devolve from the body to this is the process of meditation itself, from the body to the internal sense organs of visualization, say, to the mind. That is the mind which contains everything we can ever imagine, or memories and everything other than discernment. And then come back to the talking person, the one that is conversing and weighing up options. And then from that is just an instrument. It has no shining, revealing light of its own. And when that also is cleansed, how is it cleansed? It's cleansed by producing the noblest thoughts we can think of, the most joyful and positive thoughts we can think of. In the face of the fact that if we take a view, I'm the body-mind complex, and I have to struggle against an unfair world, then every thought of mine along these lines would be negative. It will produce a negative result. Just as sure as anything, when I visualize a lemon and I salivate, or when I visualize anything, every single cell of the body has to respond, because the queen bee of the body is the mind. And whatever the mind says, the body obeys. It's the mind that is the central control system. And from there we go back, until we find that in an area of potentiality, the area of potential creativity, an area where we stand and look. And in meditation, it is from this position that we can also produce all kinds of noble trains of thought, like a kind of internal pilgrimage that will take us internally, where that pure being, where we started from, is the only thing that exists. And so we have to purify that, purify the body through common sense methods, physical methods, but also right thinking. If I think joyfully, continuously in this way, high thoughts, then every single part of the mind's extension, namely the body, will thrill with it and beam with it. Now, they understood this in certain clinics in America, probably California, cancer patients. If I can reverse a person's thinking, then what effect will it have on out of control cells that want to replicate prolifically and overwhelm the healthy cells? It is called cancer. If thought, wrong thinking, causes this, then right thinking that is pleasant, joyful, blissful, harmonious, will counteract it. The only catch is like this: all the thoughts have to be along the lines of spiritual law, because the highest and most joyful thoughts that we can think will be those devoid of any sense of individuality, any thoughts which are devoid of a sense of self. And a simple formula for that would be love of God. The conversation with Ramakrishna, he mentions this. He says, Ramakrishna says, what will a man accomplish by mere lectures without the commission from God? Then he talks. Once a Brahmo preacher said in the course of his sermon, friends, how much I used to drink and so on. Hearing this, the people began to whisper among themselves, what is this fool saying? He used to drink. Now, these words produce a very unfavorable effect. This shows that preaching cannot bring a good result unless it comes from a good man. Then he goes on to say, so I say, a worthless man may talk his head off preaching. In other words, we have to take it away from the abstract. Then he's talking to a pundit, a scholar, and you can see why that context is there. And then the scholar asks him, how far did you go in visiting the sacred places? And the master says, well, I visited many places. And he says this with a smile, it's recorded. But Hazra went even further. He climbed higher. He visited Rishikesh, but I didn't go so far or so high. Now, then he says, you must have noticed kites and vultures soaring very high in the sky, but their eyes are always fixed on the charnel pits. You know the meaning of charnel pits? And then he tells it. It is lust and greed, basically. What is the use of making pilgrimage if you can attain love of God, remaining where you are? I have been to Benares and noticed the same trees there as here, the same green tamarind leaves. Pilgrimages become futile if it doesn't enable you to attain love of God. Love of God, he says, is the one essential and necessary thing. Do you know the meaning of kites and vultures? There are many people who talk big and who say that they have performed most of the duties enjoined in the scriptures. But with all of that, their minds are engrossed in worldliness and deeply preoccupied with money, riches, name, fame, creature comforts, and such things. And the master was about to take his leave when the Pandit and his friends bowed low before him, and so it goes on. Then he recalls to others the conversation he just had earlier. He says, I said to Pandit Shashadha, you have hardly set your foot on the tree, and yet you aspire to lay hold of a big branch of fruit, or bunch of fruit. First of all, practice some spiritual discipline, then you may teach others. That's in terms of teaching. And then he mentions, the glowworm also may think that it illuminates the whole world. Imagining this to be the glowworm's feeling, someone said to it, O glowworm, how can you bring light to the world? You only reveal the intensity of the darkness. So This is all in the context of somebody who thinks they can teach others, but hasn't really understood this. But the point is emphasizing love of God. And everywhere, love of God, love of God. Very simple formula. Now, if our whole life is like that, is filled with love and nothing else, which has no element of selfishness at all, then can you imagine the effect that will have on the sum total of the person as we interpret it? It won't have any effect on the Atman. The Atman cannot be affected and does not affect. It's impervious to anything. But the mind, and when the mind is changed and filled with thoughts, then the body changes because it is the next in sequence. It is the mind, really, the state of the mind that manufactures the cells and structures them in such a way that they are either healthy or not, joyful or not, according to the central control, the command from the headquarters. Be happy. Now the cells don't know any better. The cells will take whatever command you give. And if the order of the day is be sad and depressed, every cell of the body says, this is the command from the headquarters. So that's what I would say about it.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Now you see, it takes some conscious effort to use one's discernment, and we can use it in such a way that we can listen, for example, to the various news going on. Locally, murders have been there. And then, of course, globally, everybody who is up to speed with the world knows what's going on in the United States of America, widely broadcast, and knows what's going on pretty much. But there is at least a war going on at the moment, which is costing many, many lives. Others may be aware of less highlighted issues in Africa, for example, or other places. Now, if you dwell on these things, you surely have to be a thinking person and ask yourself, by inundating the mind with all of this, by saturating the habit level, the conscious mind with all of this, is it going to change anything outside? In other words, is it going to correct things? Is it going to stop a war? Is it going to change the politics of the country? Is it going to stop murders as they happen? And the answer is no. It cannot do it. Now, if you ask, well, you said there was a unity of existence and that it was all essentially Tambatra's divine waves, divine grace flowing in these forms. And all we see is the form-filled aspect of this. Yes, that's true. Then, surely by thinking in a specific way of global peace, by thinking of the unity of existence, by loving the divine that displays itself in all of these different names and forms, by seeing that everywhere and seeing the inner sense as the inner essence of it everywhere, will it have a transforming effect? And the answer is yes, it will. But you see, there's only one cosmic mind, and the power of community prayer cannot be underestimated. But it has to be that kind of thing which is completely positive, devoid of all negativity. And that means with no expectation, with absolute faith that thought carries through and carries through to the end and cannot be defeated unless you issue a counter thought, which unconsciously you definitely can do. And it depends on the level of faith we have. Faith means we take it for granted that we can post it and leave it. It means that we can say it once, and once is enough. And in hindsight, we can say thanks. As already accomplished, that kind of point of view. Not to come in the future, but already finished. That kind of way of thinking. Supposing we're able to do that, supposing we're able to make that a part of our daily discipline, at the same time purifying the mind through japa, repetition of a mantra, prayer, meditation, and purifying the mind, then everything becomes pure. Including the body becomes pure, mind becomes pure. The Holy Mother says that this repetition of the mantra in the form of japa actually purifies the body and the mind. Both, imagine. So, is it natural for us to bring out a negative reaction to a circumstance that we interpret as unfavorable? Well, the unconscious mind will bring it up because it's sitting there in the habit level before the situation arises. We have to put our armor on. What is our armor? Take the name of God. The Christians have a beautiful song, onward Christian soldiers marching as to war. See, that kind of thing. Yes, it requires it. So you see, on Saturdays we have the story of Rama. What does it teach us, among other things? It teaches us not about justice and this and that and the other. It teaches us about the fact that life is beset with obstacles. We shouldn't wish to change it. Just accept it as part of nature's gift. But we shouldn't be frightened by it either, because we are equipped to get round it. And you see, the whole of the story of Rama is about obstacles, overcoming them. Another obstacle, overcome it. Another obstacle, overcome it. But Rama has weapons. And these weapons are essentially mantras. That's it. So remove the mental obstacles. And then nature will do the rest. If I say I'm afraid of certain things, then the names and forms I use is God consciousness converted to the forms I'm using. So we have to use consciousness only for positivity, not for negativity, not for doubt and fear and deficit. Negative memories of the past or of the future can't be completely eliminated, of course, but they can be made to recede, like the tide receding, into the background by filling up the mind with positive thoughts. Do it all the time. Strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony. While brushing the teeth, you said. Every moment of the day, you said. While traveling, you said. While walking, you said. While working, you said. These three elements. So the Tanmatras is there, but these three elements are also important, the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And they also exist in the body. So muscle movement, for example, is an exhibition of Rajas, that quality. And bone is solid, it's really Tamas. And the decision and the will or creative activity, this is Sattva. We have to use it. And the more creativity that we put in, then the more the Rajas and Tamas will be removed or neutralized. They agree or cooperate rather than being forced to go, forced to be removed. So in a sense, the goal is sattva. The goal is to make the mind sattvic, pure. Pure means removing all confusion. It means that removing all the obstacles in our way, elevating the mind. And when we do this, then we are alleviating physical pain, because Rajas and Tamas, they equal pain psychologically and physically. But Sattva equals harmony. The body will be harmonious. See, in spiritual thinking, there's no question of right or wrong. It's just It's a question of interpretation. So you can read a book. Don't say he is right and I'm wrong, or vice versa. It's only a question of interpretation. Don't worry about it. What you consider to be honest or truth, that you must follow. And you may be catching a particular spiritual light which I didn't catch. The rose won't ask the oak tree whether it's right or wrong. The rose is the rose and the oak is the oak. Finished. We have to trust our own unfoldment from within. No love or flower can come out of you which is not your own. So don't be afraid to be original. Be original, be creative, be novel, go against the grain, as long as you're cultivating this creative sattvic component. So when you're confronted with a situation or a problem, first of all, interpret it. What is it that I see through my sense organs? And if it's real, you can't change it. And if it is not real, remove it. This is the discernment. This is viveka. The world can be changed only by changing yourself first. There's nothing in other people to change. So don't wait to see whether they have changed. Have they changed? Have they changed? It's not your business. The object is not to weigh up other people. Look after yourself first. That's the point. And in doing that, we transform the whole of our environment, physical, mental, and everything else. Well, we have 1 minute to go here, so that was a good question. Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.
Thank you, Swamiji.